Good evening and welcome to the September 14th meeting of the Public Works Committee. Tonight we will be looking at 8 consent agenda items and 4 general agenda items. First, let me say, due to the Safer at Home order, all committee members are participating virtually. For virtual meetings, committee members will be muted until asked to be heard when there is a vote. A roll call will be conducted. A committee member will be recognized, raise their hand, and state their vote. Committee members are Councilmember Barbara Haynes Burke, Vice Chair, Councilmember John Larson, Councilmember Annette Scipio. And if I could get Meredith to call the roll, please.
Councilmember Burke.
Here.
Councilmember Larson.
Here.
Councilmember Scipio.
Present.
Councilmember McIntosh.
Here. Thank you very much. All right, we've got some very exciting items tonight. Is there anything on the consent agenda that committee members or other council members would like to have pulled for further discussion? If it pleases the committee, item number 7, the action to close Fragrant Lane, there were some questions about, and we would like to do a little bit further work on that before the committee votes on it. So if it's okay with everybody, I would like to push that off till our October meeting.
Yes.
Okay. If there are no other items, if I could get a motion to approve the balance, I'd appreciate it.
So moved.
Second.
Okay, we've got a motion and a second. Can we get a roll call, please?
Councilmember Burke.
Yes.
Councilmember Larson.
Yes.
Councilmember Scipio.
Yes.
Councilmember McIntosh.
Yes. Okay, that brings us to our general agenda items. Could we hear G1, please?
Item G1, update on Winston-Salem Transit Authority services.
And I believe this will be presenters, Ms. Woodson.
Good evening, Chairman and members of the Public Works Committee.
Good evening.
Tonight I come before you on behalf of the Winston-Salem Transit Authority with an update for the September meeting. Next slide, please, Meredith. The update tonight will be inclusive of a few slides to give you an update on some projects that we're currently underway for Vista, as well as the CARES Act update on the 5307 grant funding opportunity. I wanted to present you with an update on the application process for the ARP grant, as well as the operational data overall for the past 12 months, and just a brief summary of some of our marketing outreach efforts at Vista. Next slide, please. So currently we are working on the phase 2 installation of the bus shelters in the city of Winston-Salem. A couple years ago, we had the phase 1 project and it was completed. We obtained a different vendor. ASJ was the vendor that began the installations for the new shelters and the installation and construction of the new shelters. And what you see before you tonight are the locations where they have already poured the pad and or already constructed the new Vista bus shelters. And those are the identification, the locations that I identified here on the slide before you tonight. What we are doing with these shelters, we've given them a list of priorities that was presented to you in a previous update, and they're working towards those, completing those installations. And as we get additional requests, if time permits and the funding is available, we will add to the current list of available locations for shelters. The second bullet is inclusive of the Public Arts Commission. They requested in our August meeting, the Vista board meeting, for approval of the second round of the artwork to be installed in the Vista bus shelters. I'm sure that you have had the opportunity to see some of the locations where different artists, local artists, have been selected through the first round to install artwork that, shows the creativity and the innovation of art within the Winston-Salem, Forsyth County district. And so they are waiting for approval for the Worcester board in the next meeting so they can do the second round and do an additional 12 to 14 locations that have been that are actually being evaluated for those locations and the artists to be selected. DOT and Worcester are also currently have selected a vendor, HDR, to provide a study of the Worcester services and to conduct evaluations to make recommendations for Worcester services moving forward. That consultant will be coming before you as the Public Works Committee by the end of this year, and probably the next update, they will be presenting what they are currently working on and the first phase of the deliverables that we have identified as a request during this study. Some of the services that we've asked them to do is to provide us with a service standard, which would identify specific criteria required for the installation of new shelters or trash cans or benches, bus stops, also to identify a methodology to allow for when people request buses or bus stops to be moved or installed or relocated. All of those different requests Worcester gets on a constant basis. And at this time, we don't have a service standard in place to identify or give us a baseline to adhere to. So that's one of the deliverables that this HDR firm will be recommending out of this study, in addition to looking at our overall services, the locations, and making any recommendations moving forward that will be brought to you as a committee for approval. We're also in partnership with the region, PART and High Point, as well as Greensboro and Burlington and some other locations, transit agencies around for a regional AVL project. We currently have a contract with NextBus. NextBus is one of the possible vendors that may be selected in this regional project. However, there are several vendors that have submitted their bids for the AVO project. So as that proceeds, I will bring more updates to the board, to the committee for your review and update as that project continues. We still have an ongoing contract with them through 2023, but we're currently working on that as a means of transferring to a new vendor if it's so approved.
Can you remind us what AVL stands for, please?
Automatic vehicle locator. So that basically is the technology that's on the buses that will let us know where that vehicle is, if for schedule adherence, if it's on time, if it's running early, the actual location, real-time location.
Great, thank you.
Thank you. Are there any other questions? Okay. So for the CARES Act 5307 grant update, in my previous update, I wanted to bring this to you, and we had pretty much half of the $12 million spent at that time. Well, we are currently 97.8% has been spent to date. With that fourth quarter drawdown, all of the CARES Act funding will be spent, and there will be a zero remaining balance. We still have some expenditures that we still have to continue due to the COVID-19. So we are still maintaining that with our regular operating budget, things such as PPE, payroll for any type of COVID exposures or quarantine that's necessary. So we have to continue those services, but I wanted to make sure that you were up to date with the current status of the available funds and the funds spent. Any questions? The next round that Worcester would be eligible for is the American Rescue Plan Act funds, and we have been awarded, or will be hopefully awarded, $9 million for continuation of COVID assistance. These are some of the line items that we as staff, Worcester and DOT, have identified as estimated expenditures for that funding availability. basically we have it broken down into year 1 through year 3. So for the operating assistants, the study for the Hampton Hayes facility, preventative maintenance, the temporary cleaners, those are the cleaners that are continuing to get on the buses and clean them as they come into the transportation center. Just a quick wipe down of the high traffic areas. And then of course, payroll, which is inclusive of everything, including COVID exposures, quarantine period, possible incentives to help with the workforce and the shortage, and of course, PPE. So those are what we plan to expend the funding on. And if that is so approved, that will take care of the next round of ARC funding. Now we have the operational data, just a summary of our operations for the past fiscal year. This shows our ridership performance compared from the previous year to the 1920, and the percentage of decrease in our ridership. For the fixed route, of course, you can see that we had a 23.1% decrease in ridership from one fiscal year to the next. And then in our paratransit transaid department, it was a 22.5% decrease in ridership when you compare the previous fiscal year. This slide, I'm sorry.
I go back to the previous slide.
Okay.
In transaid, did we have a fare increase at the same time?
No, ma'am, we did not have a fare increase. We actually went fare free until January 4th of 2021. So we actually suspended the fare in March of 2020, and we were fare free and through January 4th of 2021.
So the decline is a real drop in the number of riders then as well. But I knew the fixed routes, we changed some of the routes that could explain some of that decline, but transaid, we didn't really change any routes because that's personal pickup.
Yes, correct.
Oh.
We didn't change anything in the transaid department. However, a lot of the agencies were closed that we actually, usually transport passengers, because we couldn't transport the elderly community, and they shut down the adult daycares, and so that's where the drop in the ridership came from.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome. All right, next slide, please. And this slide basically just gives you a color-coded view of the ridership. The green routes were the routes that we actually did not run service. In March of 2020, we went from our regular weekday services to Saturday service only. And the routes that are in green are the routes that actually did not run throughout the whole period of COVID. The brown routes were when we were early on into the mitigation and still had an overlap of COVID. And those are the routes that are in the burnt orange color. And then the blue routes were our regular Saturday services that we actually ran for the majority of the fiscal year. And again, that was the service that we provide on Saturdays overall. So you can see the changes in the ridership from one route to the other.
Which is Route 101? Where does it run?
The 101,
it had the least decline.
It did, and that one is one that actually ends early anyway. And I'm not sure of the actual location. I have to get that for you, Ms. Councilmember Scipio.
Okay.
Next slide. So this slide just identifies the percentage, and this is just the overview percentage of not where the origin of the ridership, but the destination. So this percentage shows you for the per ward, how many people are actually getting off in the specific wards that are identified on the slide. So it's the end of their leg of their trip.
Mm-hmm.
And thanks to my interim ACM, the 101 is that Watown. That's the Watown area, the Food Line Shopping Center. Thank you, Erin. Okay, so the on-time performance for Vista is before you right now, and it shows where we actually had an increase in our on-time performance. Again, when you have less pickups for, that's the least amount of times the bus has to stop, that does help with the on-time performance. So we did see a slight increase in our on-time performance for fixed route and a drastic increase in our on-time performance for TransAid. Because again, we had the same amount of drivers, the same amount of vehicles with less passenger trips, which made it easier for the drivers to make those pickups on time. Okay. The accidents for Vista, as you can see, we had a really good, successful year. It's great when you don't have any accidents, but when we reduce your accidents and the amount of preventable accidents by 24%, I think that's really well as far as the fixed route is concerned. And then the TransAid, it was reduced by 33%. And of course, with maintenance, 66%. So overall, we did a really good job with our safety, especially during the current conditions, with people's mindsets being all over the place. The drivers were still focused and out there on the road driving in those conditions and able to pay attention, slow down when necessary, make safer passenger stops, and looking ahead and knowing all of the basic fundamental driving techniques to help with the safer operation of the vehicles. So we did have a pretty good year, and we're looking forward to having a better year next year. The call center performance, this is just a comparison of the incoming calls that comes into the transportation center. Of course, in 1920, we had over 200,000 calls, and that call volume did drop significantly in 2021. However, they still are answering the phones at above the required standard of 95%. So the standard is 95%, and they are above average with 1920 as well as 2021. And I might add that was with reduction in services. We lost some employees in that department as well, and they still were able to maintain. The managers jumped in and helped with answering those calls so we can make sure we address any concerns from the citizens. Next slide, please. Just a few of our marketing outreach efforts I wanted to make sure that you are aware of, and just knowing that Vista does more than just drive. We are proud of the artwork that, and it looks really good. Unfortunately, we did have some shelters that were vandalized, and that's quite unfortunate because, as you can see, this is beautiful. I mean, it makes our shelters look good. It's attractive, and when our passengers have to stand outside and wait for the vehicles, it gives them a nice location and something to read up on while they're waiting for the vehicles. But unfortunately, we have experienced that. But the Arts Commission and the artists are on top of it. They actually have repaired, and they were looking. We made them aware that this may happen, so they actually have backup and prepared to put those back in, install them again in the shelters once we repair the shelter itself.
Ms. Wooten, have we done any PR or promotion of these shelters and the artwork? I know we just install the shelters and then the artwork, but has there been any marketing to let the public know the artists and anything that creates pride among the residents for these shelters?
The Arts Commission did have, they publicized it, and they did some marketing communication, as well as my marketing director, Tina Carson-Wilkins. She advertised it on the Vista website. I believe it was on the city's website as well. So there has been communication out there for all of the efforts towards the artists, to identify the artists themselves and their specific piece that was selected for these shelters.
I wonder if it would be beneficial if this is something we can get the Journal to do a feature article on it, just to celebrate how, we're serving the public, not just with the buses, but also with the art as the City of Arts and Innovation. Somehow we need to tap into to take this more publicly and more widely known, just as a suggestion.
Yes, ma'am. I welcome that suggestion, and I will work with them and see what we can do to bring that to fruition. Thank you.
Mhm.
This slide here basically is just showing some of the advertising efforts that we, Vista had to make sure that the word got out that Vista was offering free transportation for any and everyone that was inside of the city limits, outside of the city limits, to make sure that they had transportation to get vaccinated. We reached out in various, and the next slide will show the other means of communication, marketing that we did as far as television. We did radio, Facebook, Twitter, the Journal, the Chronicle, the website, Wista's website, the City of Winston-Salem's website. So we were very creative in our outreach to make sure that the public was aware of how they could get free transportation if necessary to the vaccination sites. So this is just an overview of the campaign efforts from Vista.
Do we know how successful that campaign was? How many people actually participated in getting a ride to get their vaccination?
To date, we have transported almost 1,000 citizens to get vaccinated. I can give you that exact number. I have to get the last couple of weeks because I was on vacation, but it is over 1,000. And I will say the last month, it has slowed up really, really bad. I don't know why. We still providing the information. The campaign is still going on, and but people are not biting. They're not taking that transportation.
Okay.
This is just a couple of the events, recent events that we've had. The 88 Americans with Disability Act, and the staff was participating with that, as well as the Welcome Back Fest that was sponsored by Novant Health. Just a couple of our partnership. We did the You Never Walk Alone with the Sheriff's Office, just making sure that Vista is visible and a viable source for the community to help with any type of events that we possibly can partner in. And that is the end of my presentation. I welcome any questions or concerns.
The questions or comments from the committee or other council members? Councilmember Scipio.
Yes, I just, in mentioning the Vista study that you mentioned, not the AVL, but the HDR firm study, is the scope of that study to also look at how to expand our current service to create new riders, and or are we reaching those that we need to be reaching, and how do we become more efficient with our bus service? I wondered if this part of that, was that study designed to look at those areas or just current operations?
Yes, it's designed to, and the request is to look at our current operations and any type of possible solutions or recommendations for service expansion, reduction, or whatever to make our service more efficient. So they're planning on utilizing our existing data and their data and collecting data from the community, our partners, the stakeholders as well, through various means of they're going to be doing like survey stations, so people have opportunity to do surveys by paper or online. There will be community meetings, virtual meetings, so that we can participate and outreach to the public for participation as well. So they'll be doing all of that to make an effort to have a solid recommendation for all services related to Vista.
Thank you so much. And I hope they're going to be looking at how do we get workers to those business parks that are outside the city limits, but in the county. Perhaps that's a dynamic that people continue to ask me about. How do I get to work?
Right, that's something that's come to me as well early on. So that has been communicated to HDR as well. So they're going to be looking at all those areas of opportunity for transit.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Other questions from other committee members or council members?
Councilmember McIntosh, this is Aaron. I would just note, I put a link in the chat to Councilmember Scipio's point. The Journal did a pretty nice feature on the bus stop on the shelter artwork back in August of last year, and I put that link in the chat for anybody that's interested.
Great. Thank you very much. Ms.
Thank
Woodson,
you.
Ms. Woodson, once again, a very professional, very thorough report. I always appreciate your updates. They're spot on. I did have a question about the HDR consultant, kind of along the lines of Councilmember Scipio's. Have we looked at, and I think I heard the answer to this before, but have we looked at alternative vehicles in terms of what we purchase? And I know some of the funding is tied, some of our decisions are tied to what funding we get and the parameters around that. But on some of the routes that are not as, it just seems like we run big buses on routes that don't have very many people. Do we have any wiggle room there?
Yes, well, the problem with, well, it's not a problem, but we have actually looked at, my assistant general manager and I actually had a Teams meeting with Chip, I think I can't remember Chip's last name, but with Volkswagen, as far as electric. So we're looking at other alternatives as far as vehicle options and size. The driving force for that would be the funding, because our buses, however, they're big, but they still don't seat but 28 passengers, riding passengers and 2 wheelchairs. So the size of the vehicle would only be beneficial as it relates to the cost, which is actually a good driving force. So we are looking at other options for available funding to purchase different types of vehicles, inclusive. And we actually, like I said, we are looking at electric. There's some challenges with electric vehicles and a lot of things that go along with that. But we're really studying that, and we will be getting recommendations from HDR as that relates to that as well.
Great, thank you very much. I was fascinated by the matrix with the documented your outreach efforts on the vaccine information. It used to be you just had to put an ad in the newspaper. It's a lot more complicated now, and I really appreciate all the ways that you're reaching out to the public. I know that's a difficult job. And then just lastly, just a comment about the feedback that I have gotten on the shelters and on the artwork. Very, very positive. People are really excited about them. I hate that that we get get folks tearing them up, but I guess you got to expect a little bit of that. But I've gotten a lot of very positive feedback on that. So well done.
And I will add, and it wasn't in my presentation because we just had to announce, I'm sure that you all have probably heard the announcement as far as our temporary service reduction due to our driver shortage. This is something that, is worldwide. It's not just transit. There's so many different employers that are, experiencing staff shortages. And I'm currently short on both the Transaid and the fixed route. So we recently, as recent as yesterday, put a press release out that effective next week, we will be temporarily suspending our evening routes, and that the driving force behind that is the shortage. But we did target the evening service because that's when we have the least amount of ridership. Someone is still going to be affected in a negative way. So we're looking at ways to try to make sure that we lessen the impact as much as possible. But we're at a position, we kept those wheels rolling through all of COVID, and we didn't, the major impact on our service was going to Saturday service, which only took like 5 routes off the street during the week. This is a little bit more, but the need is there, and it's unfortunate, but we will do all we can to employ and hire. We have a sign-in bonus, a referral bonus for the internal employees, for referring employees to Vista. So we're doing what we can to attract some candidates to come to Vista so that we can return that service back to the street as soon as possible.
Great. Thank you for those efforts. Anything else? All right. Thank you, Ms. Woodson.
Thank you.
Look forward to your next report.
Thank you.
Okay. Can we get item G2, please, Mary Beth?
G2, presentation on the current status of the priority pedestrian projects funded by the 2019 limited obligation bonds.
Okay, let's see. Aaron, I think this is going to go to you. I had Jeff Fansler on here, but, oh, there he is.
Mr. Fansler will handle this one. I
Very
see
good.
him there.
Fantastic.
Thank you, Mr. King, and good evening, Mr. Chairman, Mayor Pro Tem Adams, members of the committee and council. It's good to be with you this evening. So one of these days I will go before Ms. Woodson. She's always a tough act to follow. So
Yes, she is.
good job, Ms. Woodson. But I'll try to be brief in my remarks. just wanted to provide you another update on our priority pedestrian improvement projects. As the item referred to, this is part of the 2019 limited obligation bonds funded in 2019. And so next slide, please. Thank you. All right, so this list that you see before you was the list that was created as we went through this process of identifying these, what we're calling priority pedestrian projects. So this list was based on a number of things, but really the high-risk locations. And what I mean by high risk is our staff in our department went through some effort, quite a bit of effort, to create a heat map and generate this list of where we had pedestrian crashes, pedestrian safety incidents. It was also based on high demand or public requests, through city service requests that were received and vetted through our department. So this list was presented to City Council back in the summer of 2019. And was approved by City Council to move forward with design and construction. And next slide, please. So what does that mean? What we did was we took that list, and then DOT, we're good for two things. We're good for acronyms and spreadsheets. So with that being said, we took the master list approved by City Council and then broke it down into manageable project lists that we manage through our on-call services. And we'll talk more about that in just a second. But what I wanted to call your attention to briefly was this is just a segment of that list, how we've prioritized these and then started working through these projects. What's shown in green are projects that are completed. What's shown there in orange is basically what's next. And we have actually mobilized to this intersection of Buena Vista and Ronaldo. We're doing some pedestrian improvements there for a crosswalk, curb alignment, and things of that nature. What's shown in yellow are projects that are currently in the works. They are wrapping those up now. For example, 25th and Glen, we just actually received the final inspection for that location. And then we're still working through some of the other issues there at the other locations that are shown in yellow. And this is just how we're working through these projects down through the list. We've taken it from that master list and sent and again created this list that we manage with our on-call contractors. Next slide, please. So what I wanted to do was just make this comparison as I've done before. It basically shows how we just took the list that City Council approved, and then we've prioritized projects. And I'll speak briefly on what that means by prioritizing those. So we took a lot of things into consideration. One, contractor availability, how we schedule these things, material availability, when we can get equipment and stuff that's needed to build the projects. We took into consideration other projects or other road closures or other events that may need to prioritize things so we don't have conflicting efforts in the same location. A lot of different methodologies went into play here to kind of prioritize these and get a working list that staff can then go down through and execute these projects. So that's essentially what this map or this slide shows, is the comparison of the list that City Council approved and how DOT staff has made that into a workable list. Next slide, please. So let's talk briefly about the money. Again, this is part of the 2019 limited obligation bonds. And to date, as you'll see there, we have spent under the actual expenditures just about around $1 million. When this report was pulled, we had a couple, we've since received a couple invoices as we continue to work. So we're right at the $1 million mark of basically halfway through our budget spending those. And we'll continue to work down through these, continue executing these projects in this list and in this order until we complete these or until the $2 million budget is exhausted as we work through these in this order. So I just wanted to call your attention to that we're right at about the halfway point of our budget, and we'll continue to work through these as funding allows. Now, next slide, please.
Can I interrupt you there a second on the dollar side of it? Sure. So if it looks as if what the work will cost is outside of our $2 million budget, what's the process for getting more money for that, or prioritizing what projects get done and which don't?
So, Mr. Chairman, that's a great question. And what we're doing here is, based on the methodologies I mentioned earlier, we've come up with this priority list. And what we'll do is we'll continue to construct these until we've exhausted those $2 million. So what's shown here does estimate beyond that based on city staff's estimations. And so would be future call for projects or future funding submittals, if it would be through a bond or through some type of capital outlay or some type of future funding request for funds to allocate additional monies for these additional improvements. Based on our estimations, we will not be able to obviously complete all the projects, and what's shown here doesn't even account for all of the actually that was approved by City Council. That was a list of 80 or so intersection improvements, and $2 million, of course, wouldn't get us to that point. So this is where we are to date and how we continue to move until we exhaust those funds.
Thank you.
Very good. Okay, next slide, please. All right, the process. So how's DOT managing this? So first off, and I've mentioned before, we developed the master list that was approved by City Council there. And then we went through this quite a bit of effort to hire on-call contractors. So the nature of these projects involve kind of a number of different elements. And what we found was, sometimes they're smaller in nature. We had trouble getting competitive bids. We went through the on-call contractor kind of process to hire on-call firms to handle these, so that way we could have more available work for the contractors to get more competitive bids. So we went through that effort to hire our on-call contractors that have been working through these projects. And then next, we went through a lot of cost estimation that we just talked about, developing what we think these projects will cost. We went through and analyzed these and done some estimating using various tools to figure out what we estimate these projects to cost, and help us to know how many we can feasibly accomplish with allocated funds. And then we went through and we set up a lot of different budgets, working with our finance department and budget to make sure that we have the funds allocated per location, per project, to make sure that we properly charge these things out. And then we went through, as I mentioned several times already, we prioritized these projects and try to develop a list that is workable, and staff can move forward with the very different contractors that we have under contract currently. And then, of course, the design. So that still leaves a lot of these projects have to be formally designed. There's a lot of traffic signal installations as a part of this, where we're doing pedestrian accommodations, and those need a design element piece to that. So that's if this list continues, as we work through this list, we continue to work through the design at various locations. So that is an ongoing thing, and will continue to be as we work through this list. And then finally, we build it. We build those improvements, and we work through those until we get through final inspection and pass those on as complete. So that is the process as we handle it, basically from how the list was generated all the way through the construction portion of the project. Okay, next slide, please. What I'll do now is just kind of show off a little bit of our work. I'll run through these briefly. You'll notice just some of the pedestrian accommodations and traffic signals that are going in. We also did a pedestrian kind of refuge area on the Jonestown Bridge over Interstate 40, where we actually had to do a road realign all lanes in both directions, and make the tapers work in, tie back in to create, basically there's no sidewalk on this bridge, and so there's a lot of foot traffic back and forth on that bridge, and we had to redesign the lane configuration to make a walkable area on the bridge. And of course, long term, when we'll do our best to make sure that we get sidewalk on this bridge moving forward, so this doesn't lend itself to be a problem in perpetuity. Next slide, please. Again, just some spot intersection improvements. What you're seeing here is an all-way stop, pedestrian accommodations at Hutton and Montgomery, and then the traffic calming and pedestrian walkway there at London Lane. Next slide, please. This is one that was very well received in the Ardmore area, kind of there at the intersection of Hawthorne and Melrose. If you're familiar with the area, this is kind of a dogleg intersection. It's kind of Melrose is it's not a four-way intersection. It's kind of split by about 150 feet, and provided a nice area to provide in. A lot of folks traveling on Melrose want to go across Hawthorne, and they do. They were crossing at weird angles and doing kind of sporadic movements. And this, what this does was really delineate the pedestrian walkway and identify a clear path to navigate that area. And we've received really good feedback from this particular install. Next slide, please. Again, I mentioned a large part of what we're doing here is pedestrian signal accommodations. We've inherited a lot of infrastructure over time that were just traffic signals, and maybe the sidewalk wasn't there when the traffic signal went in, or the pedestrian demand wasn't there. So what we're doing now is trying to upfit those intersections, as you'll see on the list, that really need the pedestrian feature to the traffic signal. And what you're seeing here in some of these slides are just that. We're working through these intersection improvements and trying to add these pedestrian signals to those signalized intersections. Next slide, please. Again, more of the same, some pedestrian signals at Miller and Silas Creek. And then we have a number of bike lane projects. And I pause here because I should have mentioned it when I was showing you the list. We have a lot of bike lane projects on the list. We're doing with this project and really trying to provide the bicycle infrastructure, and that's throughout the city. We have a number of bike lane projects that are across multiple wards that are doing different things all over the city, and we're proud of that project. And that's been one of the things that we've actually been able to make a lot of headway on, is some of our bike lane projects. And if you notice the list, you'll be able to see the number of routes where those exist on. Next slide, please. And so briefly, I'll try to run through these next couple of slides very briefly. The priority pedestrian projects is the main focus of tonight's presentation, but I also wanted to call your attention to DOT has a big push, and we really want to thank City Council for their support in really pushing pedestrian safety in our city. And we have a lot of projects. I'll mention right offhand just here, we're working on the Polo Road Pedestrian Safety Project. That's a 2018 bond project. That project is under design now, and it is basically just extends what phase 1 completed there. Along Polo Road. We're going to be adding to that, providing a lot of sidewalk enhancements, crosswalks, medians, traffic calming devices, and just really enhancing that corridor for pedestrians. And that project's going really well. A couple other things that I'll run through here. We have several federally funded sidewalk project that DOT is managing. We have the Silas Creek Sidewalk Project, which is a very comprehensive, significant sidewalk project. It's over a mile long of linear sidewalk on Silas Creek Parkway, basically from Laughlin Avenue to Bolton Street, which is a very, very big demand that includes pedestrian signal accommodations across there at Tech Community College. They're providing an access to the school, and just a really comprehensive project. It's one of the more substantial sidewalk projects that certainly I've worked on and that DOT's done in a long time. So, of course, we have the Fairlawn Drive project. It's, again, a federally funded project. We have, next slide, please, because there's a couple other I'll mention briefly. Thank you. There's the Griffith Road sidewalk. Other one that's not mentioned here is Barbara Jane sidewalk. We also have the Barbara Jane sidewalk that we're in the middle of design as well. And just a number of federal projects that staff is working on, trying to provide the infrastructure for the pedestrians there. And then finally, I just had a note here about the 6th Street pedestrian crossing improvements. So that was done there at Poplar Street, there adjacent from Crystal Towers, and we've received quite a bit of support for improvements there and what we've done. So basically, we've upgraded the crosswalks there, and then as a phase 2, we kind of did a road diet, some lane shift, and by really reducing the linear footage of that crosswalk distance to make it much safer for the pedestrian to cross. And then, of course, we've installed some of the flashing pedestrian signals there to aid in those crosswalk efforts. So essentially that wraps up my presentation. I'm happy to answer any questions you may have. And again, I just wanted to say thank you, City Council and this committee, for the continued support for what DOT does in the way of pedestrian improvements.
Councilmember Scipio.
Hi, that was a great update, Mr. Fanzer. I have a question though. On your very last 3 slides that has the graphic of the person walking and an arrow, it looks like those are solar cells. Are those solar cells on that particular pole, or what is that?
That's a great question. And Councilmember Scipio, yes, they are. And those provide they provide an element of where we don't have power. We don't have to tear the street up to get underground electrical conduit in, and we work with the vendors to make sure that the locations they go in have adequate sunlight to make sure that they stay charged. There's also a battery backup in them as well. So the solar panel actually charges the battery in case, like for example, it snows and there's snow on it for a few days or something. It does charge the battery internally.
So what lights up?
So there's an LED below the pedestrian sign and above the arrow sign. That's a strobing LED flasher, and it flashes that amber color. That's what illuminates.
Oh, okay. So when somebody's there in the lane, it's flashing so that drivers can see that a pedestrian's in that lane? Is that what that does?
So what we encourage the pedestrian to do and what's signed on the pole is to hit the button, and what that does is that alerts the motorist.
Okay, great. I'm gonna have, now where is that located? I want to go test that out.
So we have a couple in the city, but this one in particular is on 6th Street there at Poplar Street.
Around Crystal Towers.
That's
where
correct.
we had that, where people weren't seen in the crosswalk. Okay, thank you. I'm gonna go test it out. Yes.
Other questions or comments? Mr. Fansler, thank you for your typical high-grade report. Thank you very much. It would be nice if we could get this update on a quarterly basis, because as we look at the list, we can all identify projects in our ward that we have citizens who are, let's just say, very concerned about and who constantly are asking us for updates. So this is very, very helpful. Thank you very much.
Mr. Chair, I do have one more comment.
Yes, ma'am.
This kind of, these improvements are really amazing for our city. Will or can our marketing department do some informational snippets that can roll on our TV to just show what the city's doing as it relates to our pedestrian safety, so that, you know, almost like a do you know, did you know snippet that sort of shows how excellent we're being with when it comes to pedestrian safety, particularly.
I'm certain we can always generate some content for our social media pages and our TV station. I'm sure Ed McNeil looks forward to the challenge.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you very much. Let's move to item G3, please.
G3, presentation on stormwater management.
I had asked for this for watching Keith Huff give this presentation before the planning board. I thought it was very illuminating, and I know that we have some new council members, and stormwater tends to be a fairly technical subject, so I thought it'd be good to have an update on this. And Keith, if you can run us through this, I would greatly appreciate it.
Yes, sir. Good evening, Mr. Chairman, members of the Public Works Committee, Mayor Pro Tem Adams. Yes, I guess shifting gears now from the transportation side to the water side. This is a presentation, as Mr. Chairman said, we did for the planning board to kind of outline what kind of stormwater requirements we're currently requiring the development community to uptake or to undertake, I should say, as a result of their development projects, and then kind of some climate trends that we're seeing and whatnot. So next slide, Meredith, please. And then some development site observations that we are seeing in the field, and you are probably getting some complaints or citizen concerns about. So just kind of overview of where we're going and what kind of got us there, and obviously entertain any questions and have any discussion that you feel necessary. Next slide, please. So the stormwater rules that we implement today come from several factors. The main factor, to be honest with you, is from a federal and state level, where in the 90s, medium and large municipalities were approached by the federal and state government under this NPDES rule. What that stands for is National Pollution Discharge Elimination System. And what its fancy terminology for is an unfunded federal mandate from Congress for medium and large municipalities to manage stormwater runoff. And from the photo to the right side of the slide, basically anything that comes off of our city streets into our city drains that then flows into the waters of the state, we have to regulate that and implement programs to reduce the pollutant loading into the surface water. So this is the feds coming to the city and saying, folks, you've got to do this. This is an unfunded federal mandate. These are requirements. Then as time passed, we had a session law, 2006-246, that amends the post-construction rules and requires local governments to implement water quality control rules in their development standards. So that forced the local governments to ratchet down even further. And then that was then followed by several EPA audits where the federal government inspectors visited our programs. They said, what you're doing is great, but we want a little bit more out of you. So yet another layer where, hey, come on, let's raise the bar, move the needle, move forward. And then as of late, the city has a creek, Salem Creek, and then High Rock Lake, which we drain to, that are subject to total maximum daily loads. And what that's fancy for is the creek or lake can't accommodate all the pollutants that are coming to it. So we are generating more pollutants than the creeks and lakes can absorb and meet their intended uses, like fishable, swimmable, water quality use, drinking water use. So these are kind of the federal and state items that have come to the city that invokes our stormwater rules. All right, next slide. So to this point, we've been talking about water quality, how clean the water is when it relates to pollutants like metals, bacteria, floatables, fertilizer, down to dog waste. But what the city council is seeing and getting complaints about is flooding and erosion. Mm-hmm. And that's spurred on by our antiquated policies at that time for stormwater runoff of new development activities. Back in the day, we only had the 10-year pre-post design storm. So basically what that means is we had plumbing for one storm event, and anything lower bypassed it and everything higher bypassed it. So very single faceted. And they were basically holes in the ground with an outlet pipe in and or outlet pipe out and an inlet pipe in and a bathtub with very little functionality to it. But as we mentioned, localized flooding and erosion was citywide. It wasn't in one ward, it was in all wards. And it became a priority for you, the city council. Next slide. So what was put together was a post-construction stormwater control plan and ordinance that addressed those quality and quantity concerns. And these are the thresholds for the quality provisions here up front, where basically if you're a developer and you're disturbing more than an acre, or you have fractions of property that cumulatively exceed an acre or more, then you're subject to our quality provisions. So we're going to make you clean up the water coming off that side. They're further delegated down to basically a high density option and a low density option. And if you have built upon area, or that is road, sidewalk, rooftop, anything that the rain can't soak into, and your site is less than 24%, then you're going to be low density. If you're higher than 24%, then you're considered high density. And then you're going to have to implement a stormwater control measure to treat that runoff and clean that water up. So those are the thresholds that would tip a developer into the quality provisions of the ordinance. Now for the quantity provisions, it is simple. If you create more than 20,000 square feet of new impervious area, you're tripped into the quantity provisions. So you've developed enough land and put enough impervious footprint on it for it to matter as far as runoff goes. Next slide, please. So just a little bit about the breakdown of these low density projects. Again, these folks don't have to put in the stormwater control facility, but we're looking for them to transport their runoff by vegetated conveyances, i.e. ditch lines, natural things other than pipes, to the maximum extent that they can. And then for their areas that abut surface waters or creeks and streams, we want to see a buffer. Segregate that development from that creek or stream. And then you see down here the stratification, 0 to 10 acres, we're looking for a 30-foot buffer, half of which is undisturbed. And then it goes up to greater than 50 acres. We're looking for a 100-foot buffer, 50 feet of which is undisturbed. That is to just give some segregation from the development to the stream channel itself. Next slide, please. So for those high density projects, that's when the developer is going to have to implement a stormwater control practice. And basically they're going to have to design a structure that's going to treat that first inch of runoff, or what we call the water quality storm, and it's going to draw down in 2 to 5 days. You can't release it in a big slug. You've got to meter it out slowly. And that rate is less than the pre-development discharge rate for the 1 year, 24-hour storm. But that's just fancy for saying we want you to take it out very slowly, not in a big slug. And whatever device you choose has to have a minimum of 85% TSS removal, or sediment and particulate matter. We want 85% of it being caught by that stormwater management facility. And then we also want the buffers as well. So that's our high density for the quality provisions. Next slide, please. So moving on to quantity, this is where we're storing the larger amounts of stormwater runoff. Now we require a developer, if you have that 20,000 square feet or more, you're going to capture the 2, the 10, and the 25-year storm, and you're going to release it at a rate equal to or less than the pre-existing rate. So when it was green space, when it was trees and natural terrain. We also want you to manage the volume of that stormwater runoff to detain it for that 24-hour storm, or 25-year storm, 6-hour duration. And you're going to, again, release it at a very slow rate. 2 to 5 days is when you're drawing or how long you're drawing this channel down. So we also want them to look at the receiving streams and water bodies. If we have any high velocities, then we're going to look to the developer to possibly install a level spreader or something to mitigate those high velocities that are eroding the stream channel. And obviously, if they have a large impoundment structure, they're going to follow dam safety requirements. So the impoundment structure is in play with the North Carolina dam safety standards. Next slide. So climate trends. You've all probably seen this as much or more than I have, at least with your constituents calling. In recent years, the rainfall events in our community have been shorter in duration, but higher in intensity. And when that happens, we have the flooding like you see on the right side of the screen. Property owners get flooded. Bottom right that's Lakeview Drive, another item you have on your consent agenda for tonight. That's the bridge overtopping. And as we all could agree from seeing this slide, it is impassable. And this is not named weather that's overtopping this bridge. This is an afternoon thunderstorm microburst, not named weather. So yeah, these events can overwhelm our conveyances and cause large amounts of stream erosion citywide. And, you know, with these strong storms coming every year and they're occurring on a routine basis, is the 2, the 10, and the 25-year storm that we're managing for, is that the right level? That's a question that we'll pose later. Next slide. So this is a slide of a NOAA, National Atmospheric Administration rain intensity curve. And this is for the latitude and longitude of our location here in the Piedmont. The vertical axis here is the precipitation rainfall depth in inches. And then the horizontal axis is your duration of the storm. And like we talked about, the city manages the 2, the 10, and the 25. So if you look at that 6-hour duration there, you're seeing, you know, in that 25-year storm, it's just under 5 inches of rainfall in that 6-hour duration. Now, let's look at Nicholas and what Nicholas dropped on Texas this morning. That was 20 inches of rainfall in less than 24 hours. So if you go and look up that axis to the precipitation depth in less than 24 hours, that is beyond the 1,000-year storm. So just to give some perspective of what we are managing for in our smaller stormwater control measures versus what is coming in these named storm events. Huge difference in rainfall that we are seeing versus what we're capturing in these stormwater controls. Next slide, please. So also something that makes the landscape or the situation more challenging is the landscape, where we are developing sites today that we ran away from 20 years ago, where we're developing sites with steep topography, existing utility challenges, other constraints that make site planning very difficult. And the runoff from those newly developed sites often drain into pre-existing developments that already have issues. With the slide, the photos to the right, you can see a skimmer basin that's discharging in the backyards of 2 existing property owners. And on top of that, you can see a very steep slope with only 1 stormwater control that discharges right into a ravine in the back of somebody's property, who obviously already has issues there. And what this leads to is citizen complaints to the city, private property owner on private property owner complaints as they see these type of things. Next slide, please. So some questions or observations. Should the design storm standards be updated to match the climate conditions that we're seeing today? I.e., should we look at the 50-year design storm, i.e. making those controls more robust? Who should be responsible for addressing the downstream deficiencies and issues that we are seeing on a routine basis? And in general, these stormwater controls, they're best practices, but they don't mimic the green space conditions that were on the site before when it was trees and vegetation. They do their best to mitigate those things, but they are in no means a hold the line in all cases to have those pre-development hydrologic and hydraulic conditions. So we're trying our best to hold the line, but we don't do the job as compared to Mother Nature when it was green space before it was developed. So next slide. So with that, I'm happy to entertain any questions.
Committee members or council members, any questions for Mr. Huff? I know that was a very light presentation.
Apologies, sir.
Councilmember Scipio.
Thank you, Mr. Huff, and thank you for taking your expertise to my residents who have these kinds of complaints with new development. And because I think there are residents who believe that the city is responsible for allowing this to happen when we approve site plans and development plans. And to the extent, it seems like we need to be much more rigid in how we insist on controlling the erosion and the stormwater damage. And when we have these developments that get created, because nobody's really looking the long term. They look for just the right now. Oh, it looks cute, but the water that runs off and it does damage in existing neighborhoods is true. And those are the complaints that I have. So it sounds like we might need to be looking at some more stringent kinds of regulatory needs. Although that is not something that most developers would want, but long term, these are becoming real problems in neighborhoods.
Yes, ma'am.
Councilmember Adams.
Yes, thank you, Chair McIntosh. Good points, Councilmember Scipio. Mr. Huff, I would like to know somehow or another with the way that developers and realtors and them have their high-powered paid lobbyists at the state, how is this going to affect us in that realm of being able to do anything? Because they, exempt us from doing anything to improve the environment or anything that they perceive as getting in the way of them making their money. Thank you.
Mayor Pro Tem, excellent question. Excellent question. I wish I had the silver bullet for that one. Yeah, especially as we see legislation like 105 coming down that restricts local governments to what the state is putting out, and that is quality provisions only. Absolutely. Point taken, and wish we had the solution for that, because that's legislation that can really hamstring us.
Keith, to compound on your point, the quality is not hitting the issues around intensity of the storms that you addressed earlier, which are really more quantity based.
Absolutely. Our local issues have been and always will be the flooding and erosion. I tell people I rarely get a call from a citizen saying, "What's the Keldol nitrogen in my backyard?" They're always calling saying, "My house is flooded, my property's flooded, my stream is eroding away." Absolutely.
Councilmember Larson.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. The idea of flooding in Winston-Salem has become really prominent over the last year or so. We've seen, for example, the YWCA take a whole basement full of water, Salem Creek came out of its banks. These are massive amounts of water now coming off of hardscape in the city, and we can only anticipate it getting worse and worse. Kind of interested that the stormwater control issue seems to be broken up between the county and the city, that our city standards, Keith, that you are enforcing are not the same as those that are in the county, which of course are just 50 feet down the property line. And I'm wondering, is there work going on currently between the county and the city regarding stormwater control countywide?
Councilmember Larson, those are two separate items. The county is not under a mandate to manage stormwater runoff. They don't have a post-construction NPDES program that they administer personally. Anything that comes up in the county is administered and reviewed by the state DEMLR office, and that is for quality only. So to answer your question, sir, there's no...
Who's doing floodwater control? Who's doing floodwater control in this age of climate change that we're talking about? Who's looking at the big picture? Runoff is a major issue within our urban environments.
Yeah, I do not know of an entity that undertakes that for the county, sir.
All right.
Councilmember Burke.
Thank you, Chair McIntosh. Thank you also, Mr. Huff, for this presentation. I know I've met with you and I've spoken with you several times about flooding and erosion. And I want to say, just like this technical presentation, every time we have a conversation, even on our little field trips out in the community, you have really been very thorough with your explanations. I just want to add to what has already been said. I agree with, but I also want to say that we do need to have our storm standards updated at this point so that they can match today's climate and the conditions that we're seeing today. Thank you again.
Okay, anyone else? So I want to make a couple comments here, and we have to thread a needle on this. So Keith and I have stood on the side of many a yard and watched red mud flow through people's ditches in front of their house. I think when we see the census numbers come out, we're going to see that the Northwest Ward has had the most population growth of any ward in the city. So the level of development in the Northwest Ward has been pretty high. And So while it's easy to say, let's raise the standards, we do have to keep in mind that every time we do that, we increase the cost of housing. And so the needle that we have to thread is how do we get developers to raise their game without placing the burden on either the home buyers or the renters, because they're going to make their margins and they're going to pass it through. It's not as if I know of developers who will not work within the city of Winston-Salem because of our stormwater regs. They'll work in the county, but they don't feel like they can make money inside the city of Winston-Salem or probably other cities as well. So we have to be really careful with that balance. And every time a developer comes in and clear cuts a neighborhood or clear cuts a stretch of woods and develops it for housing, there's going to be downstream impact on somebody. It's impossible to do development without that impact. And so what we try to do is walk that line between who gets damaged downstream, try to minimize that, but also to minimize the financial impact on folks who are trying to buy houses. Again, we've had the highest rate of increase in our median home sales price of any city in North Carolina over the last year. And so I'm not saying there's an easy answer to this, but I just want people to recognize that there's concern on the other end of it as well. Do we, in fact, Keith, have the ability as a city council to raise our standards and say that post-production, development, you have to meet a 50-year flood event? Is that something that's within our power currently? I know that we're facing legislation that's different than that, but is that something we can do? And I'm not asking if we want to do it, but just can we?
Yes, sir. Mr. Chairman, we can do that right now, barring current legislation that has made crossover and whatnot. We could do it now.
Right. Okay. All right. Other thoughts, comments, questions? Keith, thank you for that. I always appreciate your reports. They're very thorough. And this is something that, we're going to continue to struggle with. And I thought one of the really good points in your presentation was the fact that because we are as built out as we are dealing with more challenging pieces of dirt out there that developers in the past just move beyond. But if we don't want all of our population to go out to the outskirts and into the county and increase our cost of providing fire, police, roadway service, all that stuff, then there's going to be a cost to bear. And we just have to figure out how to make that as equal as we can, as fair as we can. So thank you very much. Okay, item number 4. Can we get that, please?
G4, information regarding the City of Winston-Salem's park needs.
And I believe this goes to Mr. Royston. You're on mute, sir.
I do apologize about that. Good evening, Chair McIntosh, Mayor Pro Tem Adams, members of City Council, members of the committee. I would like to wanted to take some time to kind of go through kind of what our kind of current needs of our park system. Over the past 8 to 10 years, we've made significant investments in our park system. I think it's responsible on our part to provide an update to kind of give you a snapshot of where we are. I'd like to state that the city of Winston-Salem is known for its distinctive cultural diversity, community of arts, innovative thinking. Utilizing these strengths, it's imperative that we continue to strive to provide the high quality of life that so many people have come to expect. And the uniqueness of Winston-Salem has been a fundamental characteristic since Moravian settlers came here in the 18th century. This principle has transcended time and allowed the city of Winston-Salem to become a solid leader in innovative technologies and design ideas. This has been intentional in park development over the past 15 years as we've built new and innovative park facilities with creative design techniques and amenities. Next slide, please. Park amenities include playgrounds, picnic shelters, tennis courts, soccer and football fields, baseball and softball diamonds, multi-purpose fields, basketball and volleyball courts, pools and splash pads. Facilities owned and operated by the Recreation and Parks Department include 25 basketball courts, 2 lakes, 2 18-hole golf courses. We have 17 recreation centers, 8 outdoor swimming pools. We have 112 tennis courts. And in addition to that, the city maintains close to 26 miles of greenways, and we manage 3,800 acres of parkland. Great Park Systems will periodically conduct studies and individual park assessments themselves within their respective park systems to maintain a high level of service. During these times, various needs and requests have been addressed, ranging from playground equipment, improvements to recreation centers, and complete park site redevelopment. Inventory and analysis is an important component as we continue to provide great opportunities for a better quality of life. Being able to identify risks and hazards in our park system provides a much safer place for everyone to relax and enjoy and benefit from healthy outdoor activities. Next slide, please. We received a request from Councilmember Scipio to specifically look at potential park development opportunities in the East Ward. We work with the City County Planning Department and their staff to identify those areas. On the current slide, you'll see 11 potential sites for future park development. As part of this slide, you'll also notice which of those sites have greenway access and whether or not those particular sites have environmental issues. Again, I think there are further studies and feasibility studies and master plans will need to be completed to determine an actual cost to develop. Also shown on the map shows is the proposed Beltway corridor. There are potential park sites that shows where the schools are located and also where the town limits of Kernersville are, as well as floodplain and flood-prone issues and those streams associated with those that can become issues or amenities with future park development, as illustrated nicely by Keith Huff in the prior presentation. Next slide, please. As of 2019, Winston-Salem had 15.29 acres of parkland per 1,000 of our population, above the national average of 9.9 acres per 1,000 population, listed in the 2021 NRPA agency performance review. This metric shows that our overall park system is not lacking in acres of parkland, but it does not address location-specific deficiencies. A 1-mile service radius analysis was utilized to determine if deficiencies existed in specific locations throughout the city. The 3 geographic regions where deficiencies exist are West Winston-Salem, South Winston-Salem, and Forsyth County, Southeast Winston-Salem and Forsyth County as identified in the Winston-Salem Forsyth County Parks and Open Space Plan update. When residents were polled, East and Southeast Winston-Salem received 7% and 6% of the responses respectively, ranking them 7th and 8th out of 10 possible selection choices. Since these responses were received, the city has opened up 2nd Street Park, which is downtown Winston-Salem, currently developing Marshall Park, located downtown, and also opened Nelson Malloy Park, and is currently developing Long Creek Park in the northwest area of the city. Next slide, please. Map 4 of the Winston-Salem Forsyth County Parks and Open Space Plan update does identify potential park sites in the South and East wards. These sites were proposed as part of the original Parks and Open Space Plan or subsequent adopted area plan. No new park sites were proposed as part of the update process, given the focus on deferred maintenance. I'll go through some specific park amenity recommendations in the South and East wards. First, the Old Salisbury landfill. The recommendations were to complete a feasibility study to determine the possibility of developing the site for passive recreational use upon its closure. South Forsyth County developing a new park in the South Forsyth County to serve both city and county residents. Consideration of an establishment of a new community park near Kernersville Road and the I-74 Beltway Activity Center. In the Southeast Winston-Salem, Forsyth County, developing a new neighborhood park in the Southeast Winston-Salem, Forsyth County area. A master plan would need to be developed with extensive public participation to ensure that the park meets the needs of those of the area residents. South Winston-Salem, Forsyth County, establishing a new recreational community center in the Winston-Salem, Forsyth County area to serve the population growth in that area. And lastly, the South Winston-Salem, Forsyth County, considering including a soccer, multi-purpose, and/or ball fields as part of a new district or community park in the South area. We would need to survey the residents within the area to assess demand for different types of fields. I'd like to also point out that there's an excellent opportunity for providing park and recreational facilities in South Winston-Salem, Forsyth County, would be the retirement of the old Salisbury construction and demolition landfill. In discussions with city county utilities, the current projected closure for the landfill is 2028. Though this date could change, it does represent an opportunity to reuse city-owned land. Furthermore, due to its location, there's a potential to develop a partnership with the county parks and recreation department in managing such a park. This partnership could be similar to the partnership in place with Forsyth and Gifford counties for Triad Park. Also, given the nature of the site, the amenities that could be developed would be limited to more passive and at-will recreation opportunities such as walking trails. Next slide, please. I think it's important to mention that park maintenance is imperative for a number of reasons. And one of the most important reasons is safety. A park that is damaged or run down gives off the appearance that it's not cared for properly, which can lead to a lack of use by community members and further deterioration and disrepair. The city and our department will need to be, strategic in addressing the items identified in the deferred maintenance assessment, investing in park infrastructure to mitigate further decline, and assessing the need to modernize our park system based on community trends and resources. I think we must continue to move forward, providing the daily maintenance tasks that we all perform while forecasting future maintenance needs throughout our park system. Managing deferred and routine maintenance in our park system will continue to be a priority as we move forward with our capital planning in the years to come. In the end, I believe the Recreation and Parks Department is working to accomplish the goal of giving the citizens a unique place to go without leaving our city limits. In accomplishing this, we'll be able to share with others who live outside of our city limits why Winston-Salem is one of the best places to live, work, and play. Next slide, please. And at this point, Chair, I will be able to answer any questions by you, City Council, or members of the committee.
Great. We got questions from committee members or other council members. Councilmember Burke.
Thank you, Chair McIntosh. Thank you, Mr. Royston, for this presentation. I have a few questions. We're talking about creating new parks. And right now, I'm very concerned with many of the parks in the Northeast Ward that appear to be uncared for, and they are not modernized and they're not up to date. And I would just ask for us to go back and reassess the parks in the Northeast Ward and list the needs there and address those needs before we move forward with new parks.
Yes, Councilmember Burke. We have, since we completed our deferred maintenance assessment, we have been continuing to monitor and document what progress has been made using either 2/3 capital funding, operating money that has been identified and implemented to make improvements in our park system, and 2/3 funding. And we have kept track of where those improvements have been made and how they, what kind of impact they made on our deferred maintenance assessment. We can provide that information to you for the parks in the Northeast Ward. That would not be a problem.
Thank you so much, Mr. Royston. But I think what I'm asking is for the parks in the Northeast Ward, for the planning staff to go back and reassess those parks and create a list of the needs, and let's address those before we move forward with creating new parks.
Councilman Burke,
I'm still waiting for many amenities that I've already discussed with staff for some of the parks in the Northeast Ward. And I don't know a date, a timeline for when these amenities will be installed. And it's just hard for me to focus on a brand new park when we're suffering at the parks, many of the parks that we have in the Northeast Ward.
Yes,
Mr. Royson, maybe it would be a good idea to update our, what was it, 2018? We did a comprehensive review of maintenance needs. Maybe it's time to take a look at that again, especially in specific wards. But let's update that. And it's always going to come down to a given amount of money. Are we going to buy more land to have new parks, or are we going to maintain the ones that we have? Councilmember Scipio.
Yes, I just need clarify the last slide that it said we had $14.5 million of bond money allocated, I believe, for park maintenance. And so far, 5.3 million has been completed. But at the bottom, it says that $24.1 million of deferred maintenance projects remain. And I assume that's because we don't have money to do them, but we have part of it remaining because it's not out of the 14.5 million, because I don't know if it's been designated. So we need a report on what's been done, what's deferred, and how much money we're going to need to get it done. And I think that will help all of us understand where we are with park maintenance, because we do know that it had been deferred for some time. But I do want to say that the new park in the East Ward we're looking at is for the people who were annexed into the city. And this is the far east area where there is no parks, are no parks for those residents. And that's out near Union Cross and Sedge Gardens and that area, really more out near Union Cross. So those residents are saying they're paying city taxes and they have very few amenities. And one of the things they would like is some outdoor space, some green space.
If we could only find another golf course to buy cheap like Long Creek.
Well, they didn't have a golf course out there either. So.
Councilmember Larson.
Thank you, Chairman. Is it correct that our last study showed $24.1 million in deferred maintenance projects that remain as funded and identified in the last maintenance study? Is that what that figure means? 24, basically almost $25 million in deferred maintenance. If that's the case, the question I have from council is, where are we getting our money from? Are we going to get it from bond? We're doing a bond issue here to try to get back out of the hole. We're trying to make some adjustments to our operating budget, which we know is difficult to do. I think if we look at the maintenance list projects that we have to accomplish, one of the thoughts that needs to come to mind immediately is what are these might be funded by what sources? I'm not sure that there's not the possibility for some offered money or some other money that might be coming in as infrastructure repair money that might be useful. Try to think about maybe using some of these projects as work projects or economic development. So I would like to, if we look at the backlog, it has to be useful for staff to try to identify what funding source might be most applicable for some of these projects. Some of them are large, some of them are $25,000, some of them are $150,000 projects. If we could try to begin to prioritize those based on funding sources, might allow us to get a handle on it and move it forward. Thank you.
Okay, any other questions or comments? So the theme that I'm hearing is that we need to spend more money on maintenance, and that will beg the eternal question of where does it come from? And I think we all know the answer to that. And we have to weigh whether we want to go bond issue or whether we want to raise property taxes, which will, either way, we're going to be asking our citizens to spend more money. I don't know that there's a lot to cut, but we'll ask staff to examine those possibilities as well. Okay, is there anything else for the good of the order? Mr. Royston, thank you very much. We always appreciate your efforts. And if there's nothing else, then this meeting will stand adjourned. Thank you all.